All righty. We want to welcome everyone for joining us today for an episode of the Green Couch Exchange, where we discuss topics at the intersection of faith, money, and theology. Today, I have with me the Reverend Dr. Sidney Williams. I have known him, I believe, for has to be maybe almost a decade. I think we met about 2016, 2018,
Yeah.
where we were working with an organization out of Washington, D.C. called Church of the Savior. And they were doing a lot of work in regards to faith and money. And so we were able to cross paths at that point and just continue to build our relationship from there. And so I thought it would be fitting to have him come on and talk about all the great work that he is doing out in the field. And so, Dr. Sidney, if you can kind of introduce yourself and share a little bit background with those who are viewing.
All right. Oh, you want me to share now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. Sidney Williams, thanks for inviting me today. Prior to entering the ordained ministry in the AME Church, I served as an investment banker and venture capitalist. And now, for the past 16 years, have been serving as an itinerant elder in the AME Church. I started pastoring in Cape Town, South Africa, did that for a year and a half, and then transferred to the First Episcopal District where I served for 15, almost 16 years as the pastor of Bethel AME Church in Morristown, New Jersey. We'll talk more about that experience. And now currently serving as the Director of Development for the Second Episcopal District. And I'm sure you'll ask me some questions about that.
Absolutely. I was excited to see that appointment that happened, I think, not even 5 days ago. So, congratulations to you regarding that.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so, today's topic is going to piggyback off of the research and work that Dr. Sidney has been doing. The topic today is fishing differently, how faith leaders can reimagine ministry, money, and community impact. So, what inspired you to create the Fishing Differently framework?
Great question. One of the things I did in my prior career is I was asked or tasked, if you will, to compare companies in the same industry and wonder why some stocks perform better than others, given they have this more or less the same product, more or less the same pricing. And so why does one stock outperform another? And that got me thinking the same question for churches. We're pretty much using the same Bible. I know they're different versions, more or less the same songs. We're preaching about the same Jesus for the most part. But yet, some churches seem to just outperform other churches. Some churches seem to have a greater impact than others. And other churches seem to be stagnant and not growing. And so I wanted to look at what are the key factors from my observation that makes the difference. Um, all churches rely on tithes and offering. I've yet to meet a church that did not accept tithes and offering. And that represents the F in fish. But then I started to explore deeper what's not happening in all churches or what's sort of the breakout, if you will. The I stands for intellectual capital. And what I've discovered in many cases that members of congregations are not engaged fully in terms of their stories, their gifts, their talents, their abilities. Many times they're reduced to an envelope number,
Mm,
measured based upon their giving. Now I've discovered that even churches where, until you've been second, third generation in the church, your ideas are not welcome. And
mm,
one of the books I cite in Fishing Differently is Bearing the Unbearable, looking at congregational trauma. And it names cognitive dissonance as a thing that
mm.
people are kind of going through the ritual of church, but really experiencing cognitive dissonance, sitting in meetings, not really sharing opinions or asking questions, kind of waiting for the meeting to be over. And
Oh,
so, if
wow.
churches are really going to fish differently, they've got to find a way to engage the hearts and minds of the people who attend and participate in their churches. S stands for social capital. I've discovered many times churches are trying to fund things solely based on their own tithes and offering. Vision is often limited just to the senior pastor, but really
Mm.
no communal engagement, no real partnerships with the community. And so social capital says, look outside the walls of the church. And I can give some examples of how I did that in Morristown and South Africa, and how I hope to do that in the second district. And then finally, H stands for human capital. What are you really producing? Many of us talk about getting souls saved or winning disciples or getting members. But how are you engaging in the work of human flourishing? How are people's lives better because they became a part of your fellowship or because your church is in their community? And so H looks at human capital, to see how we're really helping the community to prosper. Jeremiah 29:7 says, seek the welfare of the city for which I'm sending you. In it, you will find your prosperity. How is your
Mm,
community prospering because of your church?
mm. What was that scripture one more time?
Jeremiah 29:7.
I like that. I want to start with, why do you think many ministries keep using old funding and ministry models even when the context has changed?
Yeah, I recently published a diagram on that. I think we
Mm,
make the assumption that churches have always been funded by tithes and offering. Well, first of all,
mm-hmm,
that's not true. When we look
mm,
at the first 3 centuries of the Christian faith, there were no church buildings, there were no steeples, no crosses, no mega church buildings. It was a house church where people gathered in each other's homes and met the needs of their fellow neighbors. It was very much a communal mutual aid, very much how the AME church started. It was about mutual aid. And then we moved to the sort of emperor or conquering period where you have the Roman government takes over the Christian religion and now moves us into buildings, puts us in collars and robes. But even that was funded by slavery and tax collections and conquests. And then you
mm,
get to the medieval period where now it's a fight between the Pope, the emperor, and the king, but still state sponsored religion and people being forced to accept religion. You don't really get to the membership model until you really get to the colonial United States, where we separate church and state. And now instead of the state funding religion, you have individual members funding religion. And there's a sharp contrast of what we find in the United States with the black church versus the white church. Many of the white churches benefited from slavery, benefited from Jim Crow, were able to build massive churches with endowments. Your black churches were largely built on the backs of people who had been enslaved or illiterate or working as sharecroppers. And so you find the black church structures far less elaborate, less endowed, if there is an endowment at all. And so we find ourselves sort of struggling to fund ministry based on a model that was never designed for our liberation. And so we have to really question our models for ministry. How can you ask people that can barely make a living wage, barely pay their own rent, pay their own mortgage, pay their own cost of living? And now, oh, by the way, I need you to support not only my church, but my denomination. That's a real tension.
ooh. Now you said something there. That is a major question on the table. I know even as an AMER, that is a major question that's on the table as well. How do you or what do you believe are the biggest mistakes churches make when they're trying to adapt to change? Because they see these trends, these changes. They know that there's change that needs to happen. What kind of gets in the way of them doing that?
Well, it's kind of like asking a fish, what kind of water do you prefer to swim in, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only water the fish knows is the water that they're in, right? And to take them out of that water could cost them their life, right?
Oh,
So I think oftentimes we're asking people to change. It's like I need to deprive you of what you have known,
mm-hmm,
deprive you of the water you've been swimming in, so I can introduce
mm-hmm,
you to something new. Um,
mm-hmm,
that's a major leap of faith. And so
mm,
I get stuck in this wheel doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And we
mm-hmm,
know it's not working because we see a decline in membership, we see a decline in giving, we see a decline in our buildings. We are selling more churches than we're opening churches. And so the need to change is there.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, you shared about the fish model. F is for faith, I is for a faith capital,
Mhm.
I is for intellectual capital, S is for social capital, and H is for human capital. How do you define faith capital in the life of a church?
I mean, faith capital is what it is. It's
Mm-hmm,
the evidence of things not seen
mm-hmm,
yet hoped for, right?
mm-hmm,
So we give no evidence of where the money's going or how it's really going the work you say it's going to do, but we have a hope that my giving is going to make a difference. And the other thing that one of my students was a rabbi said, we're not giving to God, we're giving to the work of God. And so
mm-hmm,
oftentimes when we give, even by faith, our giving is not tied to any particular work or assignment. And so if I give $1 and somebody else gives $50, it's personal, right? It's my personal relationship with God. But if we measure the work and we determine that the work that needs to be done must be funded. Well, how do we fund that? And what's the cost? And
Mm-hmm.
we have to have a very honest conversation about what can the members afford. And we're at that gap between what the members can afford and what needs to be in the bank to make this ministry happen. That's where Fish and Differently comes in, because it says you're going to have to do something other than faith capital to fund this ministry. You're not going to be able to rely on the members totally to pull this off.
I think that's good because we do need to uh, expand how we view, I think, giving and stewardship. And I think that narrow view has just uh, kind of choked us out and limited our, I think, limited our creativity, our imagination, and our ability to be able um, to move into fulfilling the mission that God has given us.
Mm-hmm.
I am interested, though. Um, I know a part of the AME Church is the Board of Examiners, and I know a part of um, the Board of Examiners is that we go to seminary. Um, these conversations that we're having are crucial because it is a major part of the life of the church of the kingdom. But these conversations are not happening
Mm-hmm.
often. And when you're looking at, I know one of the things that connected you and I was to teach a class regarding financial leadership in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So, for those who are in leadership in the church or those who are pastoring, what places can they learn this type of knowledge? If the seminary teaches maybe one or two classes, the board of examiners may teach one or two classes. What are some areas to try to stretch them, to grow them, to learn more options that are out there for funding and for stewardship?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we have to do is so there's two scriptures in the Bible about money. One is in Ecclesiastes, where money answers all things, right? So we know
Mm,
money is a solution. It is a means, but it's not an end, because the love of money is the root of all evil.
yeah,
And so I think when we're talking about money, we're often talking about the love of it, the desire
yeah,
for it, the thirst for it. 50 Cent says, "Get rich or die trying," right?
he does.
And so I think we're all in this sort of this hamster wheel of
Yeah.
pursuing individual wealth, right? We play the lottery, we gamble, slot machines, we work 2 jobs, 3 jobs. We're trying to figure out the game, how to make money individually.
Mm,
But the truth is that is a 1% probability that you hit the lottery, probably less than 1%. I don't know what the fraction is, right? Or that you're going to be the next LeBron or next Michael Jackson or the next Whitney Houston. Everybody wants to pursue that individual goal.
yeah.
But I suggest that what's in scripture is not about individual wealth, right?
Hmm.
Deuteronomy 8:17-18 says, "It is the Lord thy God that has given you the ability to produce wealth that he might establish his covenant with you." In other
Hmm.
words, wealth is meant to be communal.
Mm,
And so the church, in the first 3 centuries was about communal wealth. I may not have it in my account, but if I'm in fellowship with you, it doesn't need to be in my account, because you're going to make sure I have what I need.
yeah.
And at the same time, those with wealth realize, hey, I have an abundance of wealth. God has given it to me that I might be in covenant with my neighbor. And so, we've gotten this thing now. We start saying stuff like favor ain't fair. God's on the blessing business. He's on the block. He already blessed me. Hope he gets you. No, God blessed you to be on the block so you can share what God has blessed you with. And so we kind of get stuck on this individual pursuit of wealth when God
Hmm.
is, and you have all you need, but now you got to learn how to share and be in community. And that's the fight we have in this country, right? When we want to fight a war, we got all the money in the world. When we talk about taking care of the homeless or the unhoused or the undocumented or the marginalized, those who suffer mental illness, we don't have any money, not for them. But we've got money
Goodness.
for billionaires. We've got money for wars, but there's no money
Mhm.
for any social program. So psychologically, the psychology of money or the psychosis of money, you
Mhm.
just get at the lowest level and the highest level. We give favor and honor to people with money, and we disrespect and
So
dishonor
true.
people without money. So
Ooh,
we
that
got some
is
psychological work to do.
absolutely, Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that that's definitely a crucial topic uh, to talk about, especially when we share with everyone that their tithe all holds equal value, no
Hmm.
matter how big or how small. But in reality, our behavior doesn't share that. So,
Hmm.
um, but I am interested additionally to talk about what you shared in your book about intellectual capital.
Yes.
And I thought that that was, I think you said it in your intro where you talked about where there are people uh, who have the knowledge, but they come into the church and they shut down because they may not be heard,
Mhm.
or they may not be accepted. And I do want to ask about when you talked about activating intellectual capital in a congregation, what does that look like to
Yeah, that's
activate
really good.
intellectual capital?
So I think number one, and I touched on a little bit, we sort of had
Mm-hmm.
unwritten rules in our congregations, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
who gets to have a voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, how long do I have to be a member of this church to have a voice?
Mm-hmm.
Um, do I need to be the largest giver to have a voice? Um, and that's not written anywhere. Like, what does it mean to be in good standing, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
if I am not cisgender, if I'm not heteronormative, do I get to have a voice?
Mm-hmm.
Am I old enough to have a voice? Am I too young to have a voice? And so we don't really talk about that, and we don't make space for people to really give their gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing will say, like, okay, if it's your idea, then you do it. No, I need support. I need help, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this, if God forbid you have a narcissistic pastor who says the vision must come from him alone or her alone, right?
Oh,
And yet God
yeah.
says, I'm pouring out my spirit on all flesh. So we would all have dreams and new visions. So cultivating a space where we can listen to each other. Martin Luther refers to this as mutual conversation and confession. No big I's, no little U's. Take the collar off, take the robe off, sit around a round table and reason together about how might we solve the problems in our community.
Mm-hmm. Those are some great questions that you are asking. I think that I think that there are some unwritten rules, standards that churches have, and and we really do need to address those. But I'm thinking about how um, we do talk about, and I'm going to give an example. We do talk about tithing, like your time, your gifts, and your talents, as well as your means. Um, but I'm thinking through, and I'm almost thinking about like the space to be able to, um, where gifts and talents may not fit what's going on in the church right now, and how ministry can sometimes be limited because we think that ministry is either is restricted to the pulpit, the choir, ushering,
Absolutely.
and it may not be, outside of the those uh, those particular services. But how can we as leaders identify the gifts and the training and the expertise already sitting in the pews so that they could be cultivated? What would you
No,
say to leaders to be able
I
to do
love it.
that?
So a couple of things, and you pretty much said it, but I'm going to echo some things you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement,
Mm-hmm.
the denomination, the Methodist movement had no distinction between lay and clergy, right? That there wasn't supposed to be a difference in dress, a difference in title, that we would all operate according to the gifts, right?
Okay.
The founder of the denomination, Bishop Asbury,
Mm-hmm.
immediately on day one put structure in place separating lay from clergy. And so essentially what he did was he did a fallback to the Anglican or the Catholic model that
Mm-hmm.
separates lay from clergy, right? And that's in sharp contrast to what Peter says. We are a priesthood of all believers, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of
Yeah.
us are called to be ministers. All of us are called to serve. But in name and in practice, we've separated who gets to do ministry and who gets to
Mm-hmm.
support ministry. So if you're a layperson, your job is simply to write the check and clap your hands and say amen. That is a foundational fallacy. That
Mm-hmm.
even though we say we want time, talent, treasure, what actually happens in practice is you're supposed to support the man or woman of God in ministry because they are the ones called to do ministry. And we've got to go revisit that foundation. You see it even before Jesus leaves the earth. Peter and the disciples are all trying to figure out who's supposed to serve. And Jesus says, You are, right? They had to feed the people. They say, You going to serve the people. And the minute Jesus leaves the scene, what do? They call a meeting and create deacons, right? Because they got to minister the word so the deacons can serve the tables, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so always trying to create who gets to do the task versus who gets to do ministry. And so we really created our own problem. And so I think from a preaching standpoint and a teaching standpoint, we have to reinvent the invitation to say the invitation to discipleship isn't about just being a member, but it's about being a minister of the gospel, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't need a title to be an evangelist. I don't need a title to be a shepherd or to pastor people, to care for people, right? We've put so much on the title of pastor. All
Mm-hmm.
it simply means is you're a shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
You are in the care ministry, right? Or you're called to be a teacher. You don't need to go to seminary to teach, but you do need to study to show yourself approved, rightly dividing the word that you shall not be ashamed, right? We have hurt our own selves by creating these titles and these structures and these hierarchies.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That's So then that leads me to this question. How can churches create a culture where learning and innovation are part of discipleship?
Well, my colleague Reggie Blunt says it so eloquently. We
Mm-hmm.
talk about discipleship in terms of imitating God's divinity, right?
Yeah.
We do what Richard Allen called moral tyranny, right? You're not righteous enough, you're not anointed enough, you're not holy enough, you're not ordained, you're not consecrated, right? But discipleship isn't about imitating the divinity of Christ, but rather
Mm-hmm.
the humanity of Christ. And Jesus
Mm-hmm.
shows that in his ministry. He takes prostitutes and engages them in the work of evangelism, right? He takes tax collectors and engages them in the work of ministry. And so we have this thing where, like, who gets to serve, right? And so we've created artificial barriers. And so if we're going to go back and engage not just members, but the
Mm-hmm.
community in the work of Christ, we've got
Mm-hmm.
to reduce the barriers, eliminate the barriers, not just remove the walls, but the psychological and emotional barriers that allows people to serve. Um, on our YouTube channel, Dr. Buster Sawyer participated in one of our webinars, and he talks about when he was doing this feeding ministry, he went to the projects and got women of ill repute who wore long blonde wigs and dresses too short to lead the feeding ministry of his church. And that created an uproar, but that's right out the Bible. That's what Jesus does. Jesus goes and takes people, the woman by the well, the prostitute who comes and put the alabaster box and puts the oil in his feet. Jesus opens up the ministry to all people of all backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got to be more like Jesus.
Yeah. You have me over here taking notes as always. I love what you said about discipleship. The way that we're framing it is teaching people the divinity of Christ, but the reality is that discipleship is to teach people the humanity of Christ. I think
That's what
that's
Jesus says. Love your
really
neighbor.
powerful.
That's as
Yeah,
human as it gets. Just love your neighbor
yeah.
as yourself.
I think that's really powerful because um, I think that as time changes, as the times are changing, and
Mm,
as the world is shifting, I think that there are new ministries that are
mm,
being birthed, and my desire is that when people come into the fold, or when they transfer to a new church or while they're at their church, that they're able to not only find a space where they can be planted, but also where they can flourish. And so I loved what you talked about with the intellectual capital, because in the church, there are so many business leaders, educators, organizers, entrepreneurs that are sitting in the pews, but that are restricted in what they can do based off of what you were saying. They haven't been there long enough. They may not be in the quote unquote in crowd. But when we do discover as faith leaders that there are business leaders, educators, organizers, or entrepreneurs that are in the church, what should we do differently when we do discover them um, uh, to open up the door for them to be able to feel as though they can do innovative ministry? What are some of the ways to capture them?
I think one of the larger problems,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to say it's inherited from white Christian nationalism, and that may not be fair, but I think that's where it comes from. This
Mm-hmm.
idea of, who has clean hands, right? Who
Yeah.
has the moral standing to do the work? Um, and there's been enough media coverage of people who held high moral standards for everybody else. But when the
Sir.
lights came on, we discovered they didn't live the
Sir.
same standards they preached. Um,
Yeah.
and so we're still asking the question, who gets to ascend? Whom shall we send? Isaiah testifies, I'm a man of unclean lips,
Goodness.
and I sit among others with unclean lips. So why do we keep trying to create these artificial moral standards of who gets to serve, who gets to participate, who gets to sit at the table when in fact, scripture says we've all come short of the glory,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we keep creating these standards,
Mm-hmm.
right, of who gets to participate. Um, One of my proudest moments, I nominated for the vice chair of the trustee board a woman who had spent 10 years in a correctional facility, former heroin addict, um, theft, got arrested for theft, but she loved the Lord and God restored her soul and she was so excited. But did she come from a squeaky background? Absolutely not. But she loved the church, was there every day and to serve. And it's hard to get people to want to serve, but we're rejecting others who just want to give everything they got to the Lord and to service of the church.
Mm. This is a wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing that, and God bless her on her journey. I do want to move into what you spoke about in regards to social capital, and why do you believe social capital is so important for ministry in this season?
So here's the deal, right? So there's a
Mm-hmm.
theology of place, right? When
Mm-hmm.
God sends us to a place, he sends Abraham to a place, go to a place that I'll show you, and there I'll make your name great. Jeremiah tells us, and as we go into captivity, seek the welfare of the place I am sending you, right? God is always sending us to a place. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think our problem is we're trying to figure out how to do ministry with what we have in our hands or
Mm-hmm.
what we have in the pews, but the resources have already been supplied in the place, right? But we get stuck on who's showing up for church on Sunday,
Mm.
knowing actually who's in the community. And so, I don't know how much time we have, but I often share the story of this brother that came to my church, with a MAGA hat on, red, the red hat with the white letters. He was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely a racist in every respect. But God said to him, go by an African Methodist Episcopal church and see how you can be helpful. And on first glance, I'm like, bro, I don't think we have a lot to talk about, to be honest with you. Um, but he said the Lord sent him to the church. And
Oh
so,
wow.
I'm like, okay, how is the Lord sending you and how do you want to be a blessing? He says, well, your sign was damaged. I want to buy you a new sign. Thank you. He bought us a new sign, beautiful sign. And then he asked for a tour of the church. And I gave him a tour, had my eyes on swivel. My sexton was there to make sure it wasn't no funny business. But he says, your heater's out. I said, it is. He says, what are you doing about it? I said, we don't have the money to replace it. He says, I have a heating company. I can replace it. And so a week later, he replaces the heating system, $65,000 unit. And so I'm really trying to understand this man, like, where are you going with all this? And then he says, can I volunteer at your church? I'm like, well, yeah, but don't wear no hats in the building. And so he comes to volunteer and he tells me the next day, your soup kitchen was small. It could be better. I said, I'm listening. He says, I want to give you a school bus so you could have a mobile food pantry. Well, when we started that idea, it seemed like a stretch for us. A
Mhm.
year later, all the pantries are closed because of the pandemic. And we became the sole provider for the county for at least a year until people started to reopen pantries. And we went from serving 60 people a week to 2,500 a week. We went from a
Wow.
$500,000 budget to a $2.5 million budget. Now, the rest of that story is this brother, man, had cancer in his body, terminal cancer, two
Mm.
sons, both married, women of color, one Haitian, one Korean. He was divorced, could not get communion from his Catholic church, and he knew he was about to die. And so the
Wow.
Lord sent him by the AME church in Morristown, New Jersey to make his penance. And so I was able to visit with him, pray with him, give him a social impact award so that he could go into just transition with peace. So
Mm.
social capital is this experience, what Henry Nouwen calls in his book, Spirituality of Fundraising. It's a
Mhm.
whole invitation to co-create with God.
Mm.
And that brother passed away before the pandemic was over, but he put our ministry on a national map.
Wow.
One plants, another waters, but God gives the increase. So you can't ignore your social capital. It's there. God already put it there for the reaping.
Absolutely. The that's I've heard other ministers talk about the uh engaging people specifically who are wearing MAGA paraphernalia, and
Mm,
you were inquisitive and you didn't turn them away, where others have would have just turned them away by just what he was wearing. And
correct.
so I think that that's crucial when we're looking at what does it look like to do or to ask who should we do ministry with.
Yeah,
And even the example that you gave earlier about going to, I think you said to the projects and asking people to come and serve and to
yeah.
lead a food ministry, and how powerful that is um, to open up the doors and ask if people want to serve and how they might want to serve and how that changes hearts. That's powerful. How can churches build stronger partnerships with nonprofits, businesses, schools, and civic leaders?
Again, I think, I feel almost like this is so obvious. Like, why don't people do it? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
One, we got to learn the difference between stewardship and control, right? Um, we often like to control things, right?
Ooh, yeah.
And we confuse that with stewardship. God has given us the stewardship. He's given us dominion to be stewards over the assets he's given us. So the building is not the church's building, it's God's building for God's redemptive work in humanity. And so
That's
sometimes
right.
we want to lock the doors of the church. You got to be a member in good standing to have access to the church. I'd rather have kingdom keys than church keys. I gave my church keys a long time ago. I'd give me the kingdom keys because I
Mm.
need to bind and loose what that needs to be bound and loosed. And so I think sometimes we just want to control who gets to come in the church, who gets to serve in the church. And yet the community is waiting for an invitation not to be members, not to be controlled, not to conform, but to co-create a new reality in their community.
You have me writing this down. I know I'm recording this, but these are some really good nuggets to being able to partner with different organizations. And I loved how you highlighted the difference between stewardship and control. Why do you think that's such a major issue in the body?
I mean, and I talk about this in the book. We all come from places of trauma, right? J. Cole says we had trauma in our bloodline, right?
Yeah.
There were
Mm-hmm.
things in our personal lives that we had no control over, right? We heard the stories during Jim Crow how the janitor or the butler or the sharecropper had no control over their own bodies or their own lives. But when it came
Yes.
Sunday morning, they were the head usher. They didn't.
Goodness.
And so wounded people wound other people, right? Hurt people hurt people. And so we haven't dealt with that trauma in many cases. And now you're in leadership in the church. And the only place you have control is in church. And so there's some healing work that we've got to do, some humbling work, right? God gives grace to the humble and resists the proud. But we got some proud folk in church.
Goodness. Oof. Thank you for sharing that. That's so true and definitely needs to be addressed. When you speak about human capital and you talk about not just investing in the development of people's spiritual formation, but also the full development of the person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you speak more to that?
I mean, I'll start with a confession, right? I have
Uh-huh.
4 adult children, and I was so focused on their spiritual formation. As they became young adults, they wrestled with their identity as their gender identity, their racial identity, their political identity. And I realized I didn't spend enough time with them making sure they were able to reconcile all these pieces, right? Um,
Mm,
So the African American history professor at the high school, who's an atheist, is negative about church. And so now I got to catch up and explain to our children that, yeah, 2 things can be true, right? Um, having someone who's gender fluid in your household, and you haven't had that conversation, and they thinking, well, if I'm this in terms of my gender identity, then I can't be this in terms of my spiritual identity. And so I think churches don't have enough human conversations, right? We don't want to
mm,
talk about sexuality. We don't want to talk about sex. We don't want to
mhm,
talk about, political identity or racial identity. We try and be post-racial, right? And I think it's critically important that we embrace the full human identity and all that comes with it. Um, and I've just seen too many young adults who leave the church because we didn't address some core issues, core identity issues. Uh,
mm,
and then I've seen adults who also have identity issues, but they're not willing to talk about it. But you see it in the
mhm.
way they express themselves.
Yeah. What are some kinds of ministries that would help with that?
I think again it goes back to this idea of mutual conversation and confession, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
always having things scripted for Sunday morning. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
at some point in my ministry, I stopped liking Bible study because it just felt performative. It felt like we just kind of going through trying to prove to each other we knew the scripture.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really wanted to do was shift it more to a God talk conversation about topics, human topics
Yeah.
that matter to us in our daily lives, right? Make room to talk about divorce, make room to
Mm-hmm.
talk about grief, make room to
Mm-hmm.
talk about being single and lonely, right? Make room to talk about same-sex marriages, same-sex love, same gender
Mm-hmm.
love. Like, where do those conversations show up in the life of the church? Because so often we don't want to hit them on Sunday morning in the midst of a sermon, and it's not even fair, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not a
Not
conversation,
that.
it's
Mm-hmm.
a monologue. It's not even a dialogue, it's a monologue because one person's speaking and somebody might
Yep.
be like, wait a minute, hit that speed, you hit a speed bump. You hit a speed bump. We need to slow down,
Yeah.
right? And then everybody wants to get out of church by 12 o'clock. So now I'm sitting there feeling raw, stepped on my toes,
Mm-hmm.
we ain't got time to talk about what you just said, and so I think we need to make space for those conversations where we can deal with our desire to walk with God and yet be fully human.
Yeah. I think that's really good. How do you how would you measure that what you're doing is quote unquote working or successful?
So, I think there are some who are early adopters who have taken this information and ran with it, and they've done projects and they've transformed ministries. But I would say the majority of people, it's just simply getting them to question the water that they're in, that maybe it's not them, but maybe it's the
Mm-hmm.
water you've been swimming in, right? What kind of inspired me to do this work is I saw people who gave up on ministry altogether, who doubted
Mm,
what they were called, because sometimes it's not really you, the individual, it's the business model of church. Church can
mm-hmm.
be extractive, church can be oppressive, church
Yeah, I
can be
can.
dishonest, church can be trauma informed, trauma bound, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and it's unfortunate because in my personal experience, my mother was passing away, and I decided I'm gonna give my life to the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was coming to serve. What I really needed was to come to be healed. And we don't make space for that oftentimes. It's like, okay, you can serve in this ministry, you can serve in this ministry, just keep focused, just work harder. And
Mm-hmm.
people just continue to lump more work on you,
Mm-hmm.
but you haven't actually dealt with the grief that caused you to come to the altar in the first place.
Mm.
Right. And so
Yeah.
where those conversations happen, I'm grieving at the altar, I'm weeping, give the pastor your hand, give God your heart, blah, blah, blah. But what's my next step?
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do on Tuesday? What am I doing Thursday? How do we be a part of a fellowship that heals and meets my needs? And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of churches make space for that.
Yeah. Now that you've shared about the fish framework, how can a church assess where they are within that framework, where they land, where they need improvement,
So,
or where they're doing well?
there's two levels. One, I would say get the book.
Mm-hmm.
The book offers some key next steps in terms of listening to the stories. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the work that begins there, it's like kind of knowing the story of that community, of that congregation. We've got some tools we've created, some electronic tools to do a neighborhood assessment. I think that'll be helpful if you don't already have one. And then, having a Fish and Differently workshop, we have coaches who can come facilitate workshops. If it makes sense, I'm happy to do it myself. I'd love doing this work. Um, but it's really creating space for the conversation. And, oftentimes I leave churches after having one of these facilitations, and I'm hoping that the pastor will continue the dialogue or the conversations with the leadership and with the membership so that they find space not to just listen to a sermon or an interpretation of a Bible study, but to really be a part of a conversation where they get to serve and be and become what God has called them to be.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really good. What's the website for Fishing Differently?
So there's crossingcapitalgroup.com, which is you can go and learn more about Crossing Capital Group. We've got a YouTube channel, which is a great resource. It's fishingdifferently.net. Go on YouTube, look us up, Fishing Differently. The book's available on Amazon. We've got a national conference coming up in Philadelphia in September. We usually see about anywhere from 200 to 250 pastoral leaders or congregational leaders, both lay and clergy. And so go on the oikosinstitute.org website for information about the conference and look forward to hopefully seeing you at the conference or connecting with people on a one-on-one basis. But just encouraging everybody, just start fishing differently.
Absolutely. And so, what I love about the Fishing Differently piece is that whenever this is not like a cookie cutter model,
No,
right?
no,
This is really conversations, assessment, and not just within your church or with your people, but also the community as well, right?
correct.
Are you able to share what people can expect for when they start the process, the first step, and then what they can expect along the way?
I mean, I think as I said before, I think the first step is just to realize the water you're swimming in,
Mm-hmm.
that the way we're doing church isn't necessarily what's in the Bible, right? That we need to see what have we inherited um, in the way we do church versus the way God is calling us to do church.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the next steps, you have to sort of decenter clergy in the life of a church, right? Where clergy now gets to be a part of the community, but not really over top of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think for some pastoral leaders, even some bishops, that's a challenge not to be in control, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to be the lead, but to be a part of something organic, something that's happening, where you become the conductor or the facilitator, but not the general, not the dictator. So I think that challenges models of leadership.
It does.
Lead.
It definitely does. So that it opens up uh, the floor for conversation about a person's theology, about their position, about what that means,
Correct.
about whether or not the church is pastor centered or Christ centered. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's like, um, I think you shared before how that can be a huge undertaking as well, because it's going to shape not only how they do ministry, but how they view God, how they view Christ in the midst of
Correct.
all of this. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. I do have some closing questions for you as we are coming to a close. Um, what gives you hope about the future of the church?
Hmm. I think what gives me hope is that God is still on the throne. I know that sounds so cliche, but I really believe that the Holy Spirit in this season is pouring out new dreams, new visions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited about what I'm seeing among young adults who grew up in traditional church contexts,
Mm-hmm.
who are asking a different set of questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I was a young adult, we just didn't ask questions. You weren't allowed to ask questions. I grew up in the age, I'm 58 this year, where, when grown-ups are talking, kids are to be silent, to be seen and not heard. We've got a generation of young adults now who challenge those traditions, right? They're gonna say what they're gonna say. When my mom would tell me to do something, I'd better be en route without full instruction. I ask my children to do something, it's a conversation, right? It's like, well, I don't necessarily think I should
Okay.
do that. I'm like, what? So, I think church is gonna have to adapt because the young adults these days, they asking a different set of questions.
Yeah. And I think that's partially because uh, they want to be a part of the community. They want to show up and not only be heard, but they have something to give, and they know that there's value in what they have to give.
And unlike my generation, we were told, just wait your turn, baby. Wait your turn. You're young. Don't you rush to get old. you know.
And that's interesting because there are, I think, like 5 or 6 generations that are currently in the workspace, in the
Yes.
church space,
Yes.
and in the family. And so you have on one end where it is uh, be seen and not heard or wait your turn. And
Mm,
then you have the latter end where they're like, my turn is now, whether
yeah.
it's here or it's at another space or a space that I've created. And
Yes.
so that's a very unique situation that we're in. And then finally, what question do you wish more church leaders would ask about stewardship and impact?
Uh, I think the question I would love for most people to ask is of the people that joined, what brought you here? Right? Because I think oftentimes we think, oh, it's the preaching, oh, it's my worship team, my praise team, but to really examine why are people coming? Um,
Mhm.
and then to sit with that information, why they came. Um, and if they say because of the preaching, I think you need to push back. Well, okay, because let's go deeper. The scripture I often quote is Hebrews 10:24 and 25. Forsake not the assembly of yourselves as the custom of some, that you might continue to encourage one another to do the good works. Right. So you come in to be an encourager and to be encouraged. And so I think just sitting with that notion of we are a group of healers, wounded healers who've come to encourage one another to continue doing good work. And that good work is not necessarily on Sunday morning doing worship, but that good work is just loving our neighbors in our communities. And then
Yeah.
celebrating that, right? How do we celebrate the good work that people are doing? Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine that men and women will see your good work, that your Father in heaven might be glorified. So I think those are the questions I'd love people to see is to understand why. Simon Sinek says, what's your why?
Mhm. That is awesome. Thank you so much. I wrote that down. Why are people coming? That's a question that we need to ask and a question that we need to be open to wrestle with. So, again, thank you, Reverend Dr. Sidney Williams, and congratulations on your new appointment. And we are grateful to have you join us. Everyone that's on the Zoom or those that are watching, please make sure that you go to Dr. Williams' website. Make sure that you go to Amazon and pick up the book Fishing Differently. And we all know that there are so many conferences that are happening. Make sure that you invite them out so that they will be able to share about this great work that they're doing and how we need to fish differently. I think it's time. It's definitely time. And so also want to encourage everyone to join us tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be talking about estate planning, and we want to make sure that we um, uh, encourage people when they're thinking about estate planning to also think about other options, including the church. And so we definitely want you all to come out. It'll be tomorrow at noon, same time, same link. And so we're hoping to see you all again there. Thank you again, Dr. Williams. So grateful to be able to have this conversation. It was definitely fruitful and enlightening. All right, everybody, take care and enjoy yourselves for the rest of the day.